You can either take the red pill. You'll wake up. Everything was a dream. Or you can take the black pill. You can get torched.
Well, I suppose getting torched won't hurt that much. I don't feel anything.
Wait for it.
Oh, wait. I just got a new client. Get torched! Get torched! Get torched!
I'm Wayne Carey, and this is The Truth Hurts.
Well, we're back in the studio for another episode of The Truth Hurts, and it's a special one this week, Duck, given that...
I think it's warranted.
Yeah.
I think it's warranted, given that I think we've had so many, and we do every year, but for whatever reason, it just seems, I don't know, maybe it's because I'm not week to week involved in footy, but it seems that there's a lot of superstars in the last couple of weeks have decided to hang the boots up. And we said on Monday, we got asked about Jack Riewoldt, and I said, well, if I was him, I'd probably hang the boots up. Well, guess what he's gone and done in the last couple of days? He's hung the boots up. So what I thought, Ayrton, is we should have a bit of a chat just about the guys that have done exactly that. And some of them have had unbelievable careers. So let's start with that man, Jack. I think invariably he's made the right decision. He's obviously... He'll have heaps of options. He's done a lot of media work over the last couple of years. But what a career he's had. I think everyone acknowledges. Won 3 Coleman medals. When they were doing that, Richmond were no good. Took himself away from winning Coleman medals, in contention but not winning them. And all of a sudden Richmond were a better side, along with Trent Cotchin, who obviously is a teammate that is also retiring. So 2 of their leaders and I guess, catalyst for changing their game for them to go on and win premierships have hung up the boots. I don't know about you, but I love listening to when they make their goodbye speeches, especially to the players. Some break down in tears, some hold it together and try to be funny, that not necessarily funny because it's not a funny moment. You see how popular they are by how many players sort of get around them. And I listened to Jack last night on one of the Fox Footy shows. Very interested to hear Jack sort of say, well, you know, the 5 most important people at the club was himself, Trent Cotchin, Dusty Martin, Peggy, and Brendan Gale. He said they were, you know, but he put him, that's the most important people at that footy club to go on and win those flags. So I love the fact that he put himself in there.
It doesn't surprise me with Jack. I mean, he is a more polished media performer now, but I remember Jack coming through. He was in my year in Tassie, yep, in footies. So he was picked 13, 2006. He had dyed blonde hair and he could jump on anyone. He was jumping on anyone's back whenever he could. But everyone knew him as Nic Riewoldt's cousin at that stage.
Yeah,
And at that stage, you wondered if a bit of the hype...
He was the poor cousin, wasn't he?
Yeah, you wondered if a bit of the hype was more so, is he really that good? Is he just because he's a Riewoldt? And he had some flashy highlights. And I know the coaches had a hard time at that stage keeping him in line a little bit. And then it was one VFL game where he came out as a 17-year-old, kicked 4 or 5 goals, and he was skinny as. And then Richmond obviously decided that he was going to be their key forward.
Do you agree with what I said before, though, when at the start of his career, when he was kicking more goals, that it was more about Jack than invariably how he ended his career?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's an interesting one with that Richmond transformation because no one had done what Richmond had done with Jack, had they?
Well, he was the sole forward in 17. He was the sole key forward. So the way he competed and brought the ball to ground for that mosquito fleet to put pressure on, was never seen before in our game. You always had 2 pillars. You had the full forward and the centre half forward, and often you had, you know, another sort of mid to tall player as well. So you might sometimes play. You know, some teams went with 3 or 4 talls.
Yeah, whereas Richmond was like maybe a Josh Caddy or someone who's a real mid-sized sort of forward.
Correct. So it's been an amazing career, and you're right. He was the poor cousin that ended up playing not as many games. Is that right? Kicked more goals.
Yeah, so Jack, 347 games. I'll have to grab Nick's stats. 786 goals. That's so far. Of course, he could add a couple of them.
He got more than Nick in goals, and I think played more games. So,
and obviously, I mean, the flags are it's an interesting one. I saw it summed up fairly succinctly, and I reckon you're on board with this, that Jack's had the better career. I'm guessing you would probably still say that Nic might pip him just as a footballer, but Jack's he's certainly caught up in those stakes, hasn't he?
It's funny because I think when Jack became more of a team player, I think, well, clearly my view of him changed completely, and that gap closed immensely because I think Nic was a bigger work rate, different type of player to Jack. Jack was more of a full forward, moved up the ground a little bit more, as I said, as the game evolved and different things at Richmond evolved, whereas Nic could just get around the ground, marking machine, can get lots and lots of the ball, whereas Jack never got as much of the ball. So different in that aspect. It is hard. I don't think Nic had the creativity that Jack had when it came to certain aspects. When Jack became really team orientated, the tap-ons and really brought his team into the game, I don't think Nic did that as much, but I think that Nic was probably the better player.
What about Jack's footy? I mean, you mentioned the tricks that he learned along the way, but what made him a good forward? Because I look at him, and I reckon early in his career, I wondered, is he going to be a superstar? Because he didn't necessarily have the attributes of some other, but he was to me, it felt like a very clever body player. How did you view his development as a forward?
Well, I think in the end, the unselfishness of him and his ability to compete and not be outmarked. So not necessarily have to take the mark, but not be outmarked was exactly what they needed at that time to win that premiership with who they had at their disposal. So for me, that was it. So great career. Well done. We've spoken about Buddy already. I don't think we can say any more about Buddy Franklin. He'll go down as a legend of the AFL. And then you've got a guy over in Perth who I loved as well. Once again, someone stolen one of my phrases.
Oh no, you're a bit upset about this.
I came up with.
Tell our listeners what.
Well, I came up with this years ago. When I say years ago, I mean a long, long time ago. I don't know how many years ago, but a long time. Nic Nat was the Cyril Riewoldt of Ruckman. And I came up with that purely because when everyone was raving about Nic Nat, I couldn't see it. And I was actually quite critical of him. I'm going, hang on, the bloke takes 2 marks a game. He gets 8 or 10 possessions. And then when you look into it more deeply, the way his team and the midfield and the way they operated when he was on ball and the influence that he had with only having that amount of touches and taking that amount of marks was profound for that footy team. He won two B&Fs, All-Australian 3 times. So, I mean, that's a pretty good CV for a guy that doesn't get, like I said, huge disposals. And once again, it does highlight the fact that, you know, accumulators aren't everything in this game. So getting a stack of the ball isn't everything. You can have a massive impact without doing that. And Nic Nat was the pin-up boy for ruckman in that area. And I've never seen a ruckman that can have that amount of ball and have that influence.
His story was always closely watched, wasn't it? Because there was the big discussion around pick 1 and 2 of that year with Jack Watts and Nic Naitanui, and I think West Coast would be pretty happy with who they ended up with in that scenario.
I love Wattsy, but I think West Coast got the better of that. Obviously, his teammate Luke Shuey, you know, Norm Smith medalist, best and fairest winner.
He gets overshadowed a bit, Luke, because of the goal in the final minute of that game, the Dom Sheed goal. Yeah, Sheed gets all the
and he won the Norm Smith. Yeah, when he was fit. He was a powerful. He had that bull mentality, that Dangerfield mentality. Super player, obviously in the end, his body has let him down, but will go out of the game as one of the West Coast greats without question. We touched on Trent Cotchin before. His ability to change the game or change his game, just like Jack did, and go from best and fairest, Brownlow medal, albeit, got that one because
Joe Watson won.
Joe Watson.
Yeah.
I don't count that. Trent shouldn't count that either. Anyway, he's got it.
I think he was a bit sheepish going into getting it initially.
And so you should be. Sam Mitchell and Trent got the Brownlow that year, but it was Joe Watson's as far as I'm concerned. But he was a super player, but an accumulator, turned that around into being a super leader and leading the way and hard at it, cheeky hard at it too. Had a little bit of mongrel in him, which a lot of people didn't expect coming from such a clean-cut individual.
So crucial to that midfield. When you look at the Richmond midfield on paper of all the dynasty teams, that they maybe didn't have the – I mean, Dustin Martin was obviously unbelievable in his 2017 year, but you'd say he would drift forward in games. You know, Trent, Dion Prestia, Jack Graham, these guys – He carried a big burden in that regard.
He did, and and in the end, he goes down as a 3-time premiership captain. I mean, enough said about Trent Cotchin. He'll be a Hall of Famer without doubt. Who's the other one we've got here? Isaac Smith, who premiership player at Hawthorn, then wins the Norm Smith at Geelong. What a great story! What a great way for him to finish his career as well, because he was under Clarko, high intense, obviously winning premierships, then went down to Sleepy Hollow, as some people like to call it, and just loved his footy for the last couple of years.
Funny listening to him say he enjoyed his footy more than he ever had playing down in Geelong.
And, and just an unbelievable player. He was highly touted, just roaming up and down that wing, speed, skill, obviously goal kicking on the run was something that we all loved. Couple of North Melbourne boys. I think we should touch on Ben Cunnington.
Yeah, we almost snatched the victory for them on the weekend. He kicked a couple against Essendon.
Kicked 2, great moments.
Yeah,
gone through a lot in his career, overcome cancer, and I think going through that, but he shouldn't be remembered for overcoming. This guy was a super footballer. He was a contested beast, and when you had him in there, you just walked taller. He was just so courageous in everything.
His combination with Todd Goldstein particularly was
the fend off, which I love listening to people compare his fend off to Dusty. They go, Dusty's was obviously unique in the way and very effective, but they said Cunnington's was like running into a brick wall. He was like he put his palm through your chest, so you certainly knew you were fended off when Cunnington.
He was a bit more brutal.
He was 100% more brutal. So I think JB said on Triple M a couple of weeks ago when they knew that he was going to play his last game, he said he'll drift off to the farm and probably never be seen again. I hope not, because he's been
amazingly he's notorious for avoiding the media. He didn't love doing it. I remember having a conversation with the North Melbourne media manager Heath O'Loughlin at the time. He'd send him a text saying, "What do you reckon?" "Nah, mate. Nah, no chance."
Well, he probably wasn't sought after a lot either. He was one of those players, and it just went about his business. And he's highly respected at that footy club. Jack Siebel is the other one, captain for a long time. Been a real warrior. I think started in the midfield, half back. He's been tried forward. He's had success all over the ground at different times. Probably didn't reach the absolute heights that I reckon Jack could have reached, and whether that's because he played multiple positions or other guys came in and he got moved around.
Did have some injury as well, didn't he, when he was playing that sort of mid-forward role?
So he had a really bad leg break, I think. He's got a massive injury list. So there are reasons for him maybe not reaching that level that I thought he was going
You can't
to reach.
question, I guess, what he's given North Melbourne, can you?
Courage personified. Both of those guys, never took a back seat. They were, great stalwarts of the footy club. So he'll be one that is sorely missed. I know there were others that
one more recently
retired.
Paddy McCartin.
Sorry, Paddy. For a lot of different reasons. When we interviewed Paddy at Triple M. Must have been 4 or 5 years ago now, where he came into the box and he couldn't even go to a supermarket with bright lights. He couldn't leave the house on a sunny day. Like he couldn't stand up. This is what this guy went through, and you thought, okay, his career, he's never going to play footy again. So then to go up to Sydney and go through what he went through to get back and play a level of footy that I thought, wow, this guy's going to...
It's nearly all Australian type form, wasn't
he? He's now going to play 150 games maybe, and with his brother, what a great story, and how much they love playing with one another. I just thought incredible stuff.
You just hope he's got some closure from that. You hope that couple of years in Sydney has got him that...
I tell you what, for me, what it's given not that I need closure for Paddy McCartin. I think it proved to everyone that Paddy McCartin was a serious AFL footballer. I don't think until he went to Sydney we knew that. I don't think he was able to show us that often enough at St Kilda for you to walk away and go, hang on, this is a serious AFL footballer, number one pick, that actually has been cut down through concussion, and he would have been he would have been an All-Australian player without question in my mind, given what we saw at Sydney over that time. So now I think you can confidently say that about.
We've got Carter roaming the studio at the moment.
Carter just walked through camera. So that's the great thing now that he can hang his hat on. Not that he needs to. I know that he would have known that within himself, and those closest to him would have known that. But I think the whole footy world knows that now. So well done to Paddy McCartin.
Before we move from the retirees now, I know you hate rankings, but I'm gonna put this on you.
I'm not going to rank.
So Buddy's the number one. He's the number one out of this year's retirees. Out of the list we've just mentioned there, Jack, Cotch, Nic Nat, Shuey, Smith, Cunnington, Zeeble, Paddy McCartin. Just give me your top 3 or 4 in order. Can you do that for me?
Just off the top of my head, I'll say Buddy, Cotch, Riewoldt, Nic Nat, Shuey.
So you've gone the mid ahead of the forward with Cotch ahead of Jack. Interesting.
Captain.
Okay.
Captain, 3-time premiership captain.
Yeah, there's not many of those around.
No.
You just missed out on that.
So those guys, all of those guys will go off and have hopefully great lives after footy. Some of them I think we'll see a lot more of, and some, as I said, will drift off.
That's before we leave Jack Riewoldt. I do find it fascinating that he's now going to end up with a career in the media, because he and Nick were both guys that absolutely hated the media early in their careers. I'll never forget when he came out, Jack would often be foot in mouth early in his career. Remember he criticised the game plan of Damien Hardwick. He said, we tried to play like Dimma wanted to play like us to play like Hawthorn, and it didn't really work out. So we scrapped Dimma's game plan, and so for the next week, Jack's been chased around, and then he got dropped from the leadership group, Richmond, and so the media was waiting for Jack outside the football club that day, and Richmond had formulated this plan to get Jack into a car on Brunton Avenue outside the club. Jack's got a bit antsy, and the car he's left the club, but the car wasn't there. And so all the media's followed him, and he started running down the street. And so the most of the media has let him go, but this one cameraman's followed him to Richmond Station, and there's this.
Surely you can outrun a camera.
This all-time incredible vision of Jack buying a Mckay card after his.
I remember that, actually.
Poor old Jack. Sorry, but he wasn't a massive fan of a few at Channel 9. Thankfully, I feel like I got off scot-free with Jack for the most part. But he'll be a good media presence now. So
and soon as though we've done this little retiree add-on, let's quickly have a quick chat about what we're about to embark on, because there's a lot of things going on at the Blues. Talk of Mckay, Harry maybe playing this week. Some people saying, does he need a game in the reserves? Does he come back? How does that affect the way they're gelling? It's a funny one, because in my experience, when you bring back, they've all lifted in his absence, and they're playing some great footy. Then you come back, it's whether one or two of those forwards just slightly drop off and go, we've got Harry back, and it just how that upsets the way the connection that they've had in the last 8 weeks.
Is that not outweighed by the times where they've needed that second target, like the St Kilda game, and even at times against Melbourne, where Charlie's maybe come up the ground to get the footy, and then you're just lacking that.
It's more so the mental mindset that I'm talking about. So once again, the ball is going to go through. They're going to be getting, including Charlie, less opportunities when he comes back. So those smalls have to think differently to how they were thinking prior. So, they understand that they get to the feet of Charlie. They're a target themselves, more so than what they were when Harry was playing. So that whole thought process is very different when he's back in that team. So how that affect it is the magical question. So does he come in, or does he have a game and get a lot of confidence in the VFL. Fascinating for me because clearly they need to continue to win, and it's a big call. And I'm not sure. You would have to be unbelievably confident in how he's been training. He would have to be training the house down for me to bring him back in.
I had to listen to some of what he had to say. He said the surgery went well and he's been ticking off the markers that the club has given him 2 or 3 weeks.
I don't give a crap about ticking off markers. I mean tearing up the track. Give Michael Voss no option. There cannot be one bit of doubt in Michael Voss's mind about bringing him back in. If there's slightly a doubt, straight in the VFL, play a game, because unless he's tearing the track up, I wouldn't do it.
It's an interesting question, the VFL. I've spoken to a few footy people about this, in that it's not always the confidence boost that you want it to be because
not if you don't get a kick.
Well, because you're not getting the same
delivery,
and not getting the same delivery, and it's a very different game to what you're playing.
Yeah, but if you go down to that level, and
how many VFL? Well,
not a lot, but when I did, I think the one game I got dropped in 1990, I think I had 18 marks.
They wouldn't have even been doing stats back then.
It was against the Bombers actually at Windy Hill, but that you have to go back there. Okay, delivery not as good. Well, guess what? You're 6'82" and 110 kilos. Whether it's delivered to you properly or not, you mark it because you're better than the rest of those players. You're a Coleman medalist. So if you were to play VFL, you go back there and dominate, and then you come back in the next week. And if you don't dominate, then guess what? You stay there for another week.
Okay, so you've floated that as an option. Let's say the medical staff have ticked Harry off. Let's say that's happened. Yep. What decision are you making?
If once again, all based off whether he's got to be tearing the track up. He's not just going through, as you said, ticking the boxes. Snowy off the trams can tick a box. You've got to. He's got to be attacking the footy, competing, and the bare minimum that you want from him. I wouldn't expect Harry to come in and kick 3 or 4 goals. I just expect him to come in and just be ultra competitive. Like I said, just smash packs, use his size. Goals are the bonus. Don't get in your teammate Charlie's way. Make sure there's separation. So make sure that at least that synergy's there. Lead to different spots, lead in and out of space, create space for one another. All of those little things. That's what Harry has to do if he's to play.
Who do you like? Who do you like playing as the deeper forward, and who do you like playing up the? Because Charlie's probably got the better ability up the ground.
He's got the better tank.
But he's also been their most dangerous around goal. So
yeah, I think you rotate. I think with those two, you've got to rotate it, and you've got to whoever comes to you. For instance, if Harry's playing on a guy that likes to be if he's playing on a May, for instance, when they play Melbourne, then you don't want May to be that pillar there. You want to take May out of his comfort zone, so you would be taking May up the ground, and then you'd let Curnow come in behind you. So it's horses for courses on who picks you up, and trying to get a mismatch with who picks you up. That's what.
So is that more interchangeable than perhaps it was back in, say, your day, where you're more defined as a centre half forward, or
always it should be defined, and you should always have the license depending on who you're playing on. For instance, if a Charlie Cameron from Brisbane gets a guy that uses his body really well, doesn't allow him to leap at speed, well, you just got to get him. Charlie's got to get him up the ground and run back towards goal, and he's got to get to stoppages and run through stoppages, and all of these different things that you've got to understand who your opponents are and their strengths and their weaknesses, and you take them to their weakest spots on the ground. That's what you do, and that's what Harry and Charlie have to do when they're back playing together. So that's a fascinating. That is a fascinating watch for me, that particular game.
Collingwood's got more injury concerns on top of Nick Dacos and Darcy Moore. Jordan De Goey unlikely to play this week against Brisbane. Bobby Hill perhaps the same. De Goey's got a corked quad, I think it is. So they're maybe not going to take a risk with him. I'll just clarify that injury. But I'm interested in where you see Collingwood and what effect that can have on a team, because they lifted against Geelong minus Dacos and losing Darcy Moore early. Is it sustainable for them, or do you think they're going to face some trouble?
When you lose good players, it's not sustainable for a long time, but it can be a good thing for a week or two, because players around you lift and they, and all the talk is, well, we haven't got him. So subconsciously, you understand that you have to try to lift at least 3 or 4% to cover the player that's got more ability than the player that comes in, clearly. So that's where Collingwood finds itself. So are they putting the queue in the rack a little bit? Do they have to? They obviously can rest a couple of players that maybe not quite right. Like obviously DeGoey, maybe if it was a game where they had to win to finish top 4, maybe he might play. They have that luxury given that where they're at. The other fascinating thing about this game is that it's at Marvel Stadium on a Friday night with Collingwood and Brisbane. I mean, that'd get 60, 70, that'd get 70,000 at the MCG. The MCG's empty. Weird call. Not sure why.
So Collingwood contractually agreed to play 2 games a year at Marvel against interstate sides. They lobbied the AFL to move it, and their argument was, I think the Brisbane would be happy to get another game at the G, but the AFL, I think because it likes Marvel to have these marquee games every now and then, didn't want to move it. So,
I think it's weird, full stop. Brisbane, though, if Collingwood go in and beat Brisbane with those players out, then you all of a sudden that mental side of their game gives them a real advantage, I think, going into September.
Do you ever think sides can lose? We're now getting teams that might rest a couple of players, and we do have the pre-finals bye, which can mean you can get players back. Do you ever worry about losing momentum, losing your mojo, so to speak, in these final rounds?
I think because, and that's what's fascinating about this year, because all the positions can change except for Collingwood, then all the other teams are trying to win because it's where you want to. It's where you want to finish, and whether do you want to meet Collingwood in round 1? Do you want to finish 4th? Do you want to finish 2nd, 3rd? Who do we play? Who do we match up against best? And then you've got all those other teams that are still vying for positions in that bottom part of the 8, and those teams just out of the 8 that are trying to get, that still can get in if results go their way. So there's no room for that. And by saying that, and I say this every year at this time, been an unbelievable year for upsets. Mark my words, these last 2 rounds, we think we've had upsets, watch for some more, because it happens every year. Every year, especially when the pressure comes on, those sides that can't. Look what Hawthorn's done the last 2 weeks. Everyone goes, it happens all the time because they play with the freedom. The sides around them stiffen up and expectation. The game, it becomes too much for them. Some handle it, some don't. And Hawthorn have proved that the last couple of weeks with some big wins, and Hawthorn have got the opportunity to do that again.
There's been some big coaching news during the week. Something that I think we all thought would happen as soon as Stuart Dew was sacked. We perhaps thought cynically
it hasn't been announced yet, though, has it?
No, it hasn't been announced. Yeah. Reports that it's been agreed that Damien Hardwick will be the coach on a 5-year deal of the Gold Coast Suns. I think we all thought that would happen. The Gold Coast wouldn't have made the decision to sack Stuart Dew without having some sort of agreement with Damien Hardwick. How do you see that fitting with Dimma on the Gold Coast?
I don't know. He's a 3-time premiership coach, so he gets that automatic respect. Does he make Gold Coast better? I'm not sure. Players make coaches. It's not the other way around. So can he turn? So he clearly thinks that they have the list that he can make them better than what the coaches before him have been able to do. Stewie Dew, they've had some really good performances with Stewie. They've had some really poor. Can he make this side more consistent purely by having a reputation, which is what he's got, and walking into that club? I have question marks over whether he's going to do any better or not.
Surely, I understand, I've heard you make that point before, surely the great coaches have a level of, whether it be man management, motivation, tactical nous, ability to get the best out of their people that the good coaches or average coaches don't have.
How did Pagan and Malthouse go at Carlton?
They had average lists, but
correct.
What if you have two lists
and were put up against it? They Carlton got fines and draft
because their lists were incredibly poor. But if you have 2 lists that are identical, let's say you have a list that, as in this scenario,
a coach can make the difference.
Yes,
yes, a coach can make a massive difference.
Do you think Damien Hardwick is an upgrade on Stuart Dew? Or it's hard to know from the outside, but you're saying that you're not convinced.
I'm not convinced that Hardwick is going to do any better than what Stewie Dew has done with that list. They would have to improve the list, which we say all the time, which once again gets back to the point. Players make coaches, not the other way.
Interesting. Yeah, interesting. I agree to a point.
The other big signing, which I really like, and I can't, for whatever reason, it's a bit like Chris Scott down at Geelong. Some Geelong supporters, for whatever reason, have something against. Well, they certainly did until last year, probably. Maybe not as much now. Chris Scott has been just an incredible coach. Yet for whatever reason, some people, he rubs people up the wrong way. It's the same with Ken Hinkley and Port Adelaide supporters. The amount of abuse that they've copped of just little bits, not that, half of those people that write those comments are dingbats and you don't listen to it. But, this guy has been incredible for this footy club. Okay, so he hasn't delivered a premiership. Unlucky a couple of years ago in a prelim against Richmond. Where they lost by less than a kick in the wet. So, I think signing him for 2 years is a really good decision because I think that Ken and Port Adelaide think, whether it be this year, I think they think that this list, they'll get a premiership in the next 2 years.
Did they need to do it before the finals? What would have happened between now and the end of the season? Because I guess Port Adelaide has been in this situation a few times.
Well, he could have left. That's why.
I guess he could have done, but perhaps unlikely, less likely.
No, I would. Well, you've got Richmond, which would be going through a process. I reckon if they got to that point and then were to be knocked out and he wasn't signed, I reckon he'd be one of the first ones on their list. So he's one. I think he'd be a sought after coach. So, for that reason. And I think they're a massive chance of winning the premiership this year. I think they're one of the favourites in my mind.
Which they have been at different times. I mean, they made it.
Yep, they've got all the attributes for me,
but they haven't done it yet
to win it. But they haven't done it yet. So giving him, irrespective of whether they do it this year, they're giving him 2 more years with this unbelievable midfield that they've now built, along with a young forward line, which they haven't had all of together for the whole year, but they've got some absolute young guns. They don't rely on Dixon anymore. They've got a solid defence. So they've got, they need to improve their depth, but they've got the basis of being I think a premiership team over the next couple. So I think it's a really, really good signing.
Yeah, okay. And you got some interesting thoughts today. I thought you might have gone in another direction with a few of these, but
just on talking about thoughts, and this is going completely off. And you know what I think? Why do people that love their footy club, and I'm talking, just what's hit the news in recent times with, and I'm happy to say I'm a teammate and a mate of Simon Goodwin's, but to hear what. Just to hear the blow up of the last 24 hours, and I'm not talking about the accusations.
So you're referring to the latest article in the Herald Sun by Michael Warner, which is allegations going through WorkSafe via Glenn Bartlett.
By the way, if you make an allegation in WorkSafe, if you put the beer in the wrong fridge, at your job, then they have to investigate it. So I just feel terribly sad for. I feel terribly sad for the Melbourne Footy Club. I feel terribly sad for not so much Goody, but for his children that have to, continually read. And for people that, and I know that, people have lost jobs and left the footy club and, you've got partners of people that left the footy club and all that sort of getting involved. But if you love the footy club, why would you want something like this to continue to drag on?
That's the strange part of the scenario.
I just don't get it. I don't see why, and I also don't see why it was as big a story as what, everyone, what it's been blown up to. It led the news. Well, not led the news. I think the Matildas, and so they should led the news. But for me, it's grubby. That's what it is. The whole thing's grubby.
The scenario is an interesting one because since these allegations were alleged to have happened before Melbourne won the premiership, so you feel like the premiership almost, regardless of whether the sins are true or not, that there must have been reasonably functioning football club for them to be able to win the flag.
I would have thought so. I like I said, I feel for the people surrounding these stories more so than the people themselves sometimes, because you build a thick skin when you're in the industry. But it's just the whole thing just really disappointing, and the way it's reported, I still think is disappointing as well, because it's blown into a bigger story than what it should be.
We did have what would you describe as an animated discussion before we came on, and this is and maybe I, coming from a reporting background, I know I'm on a hiding to nothing compared to what a lot of the people out there will think. But, I don't have a problem with Michael Warner's reporting. I'd say it's more of the way the allegations are being made. This is through multiple courts, so I'm not sure how you avoid it.
I just think, unfortunately, I get it. I just think, unfortunately, in an industry where there's a lot of other things that they report on certain people and not on others, which I find
I won't disagree with that.
They pick and choose. They pick and choose who they want to report.
I understand you feel the brunt of that.
It's a bit like the tribunal. The media are no different, in my opinion, to the tribunal, and that is Toby Green gets treated differently, no different to the umpires. Ginnivan gets treated differently to other players. It's the way the world goes around. Some people are interesting, some people aren't, and that's how all of these things work. And I think the media are at the very top of that, and then we go down, and like I said, some players get rubbed out for 2 weeks, some players don't. Some players get a free kick, some players don't.
Yeah, fair enough. I wouldn't be blaming Michael Warner or the Herald Sun for this one though. Right? I'd be putting it squarely at the former presidents.
Yeah, who determines where it sits and where it gets to? In, for instance, when you flick on the news of a night, who determines where that goes?
Yeah, and this is an interesting one, because this is where I think a lot of the irate supporters lose their arguments, is because they're the ones who decide where it sits, and until they stop consuming this type of news, then it is still going to be news. But there is a difference. The first thing you're taught when you go to when you do your journalism course is there's a difference between what is interesting and what is in the public interest, and you're meant to decide, is this story in the public interest?
Who determines then, when we read a story, for instance, someone says, so Jonathan Brown says something on his show, and he said, I think that Jack Riewoldt wasn't that good today or whatever, and then it comes up, former Brisbane champion, which I'm happy with if it's about Jonathan Brown. Former Brisbane champion says A, B and C.
Yep.
Who determines those headlines when they will say, this former champion, and it sucks you in, because then you read it and you realise it wasn't from a champion, it was from someone else.
There's no doubt been an explosion.
Who writes those? Who writes that crap?
There's no doubt been an explosion of clickbait in the social media era.
Yeah, so who determines that, and do they answer to anyone for writing that, and how do they get away with that? Because that's false advertising.
If you say champion when they're...
If you say champion or legend when they're not,
yes,
then
that's a bugbear of mine.
That's false advertising.
Because even in the Channel 9 newsroom, you don't have control over every football story because someone else is off going it, and they'll say AFL star, and it's a guy who played
like saying
3 games.
But like saying former actor.
Sometimes
because I did a couple of commercials years ago, or former actor. Like
so there's different scenarios there. Sometimes it'll be people who just don't know enough about it. So everyone.
So how are they in that? Position?
Because they might be a news person, and the football story has come.
No, I think they deliberately false advertise.
If you let me finish my sentence, and then there are the people that know that they're going to get more clicks out of that. In the Simon Goodwin scenario, and this is the disagreement we had before. I don't think there's any way you can not report that story.
No, but I think they put it to the top of the news to elevate it to something that it isn't.
Well,
it's not that big. It's not. There's. If you read the whole thing, it's nothing new that has been allocated, and it's not even. It's
I'm not saying I agree with any of the allegations, and I don't, and I think he's definitely got a right to live his life. This has come as a part of Glenn Bartlett's claim.
No, this is what I just don't know how it gets that high up.
Well, it's going through federal court and Supreme Court and WorkSafe, so that's the prominence. If it wasn't going through the courts, then it would be less prominent. But I don't think we're ever going to come to an agreement on.
Well, I just think it should go where it's deserved, and that is into the Grubby area.
Is there a special section? Is there?
Well, yeah. If it's just Grubby,
I think I accept that. I think you accept too. There are times where you've deserved to be reported on, and there are other times as a result of that.
I'm not talking about, but don't bring it back to me.
No, but I think there's a bit of scar tissue up there about.
There's no doubt there's scar tissue. I'll put my hand up for scar tissue. I do get blown. I mean, we've just come through. I don't want to get political, but we've just come through. The whole world's gone through. What we've gone through in the last few years, and how that's been reported and not reported and everything else. So we could sit here for a week and talk about the do's and don'ts and what should have and what shouldn't have. But I do get bemused when certain things are put up a lot higher in the news feed than what others have done that we all know way worse, that don't even get on the newsreel or even get reported on at all. So
Wayne's Media Watch, that new segment.
We might have a segment of that. Start making a few people accountable.
Well,
especially when it's. I mean, I'm not. That's clearly not made up, because, as you said, it's in the court. Doesn't mean it's accurate. Doesn't mean it's true.
No, it just means it's an allegation.
It just means it's an allegation. But what I'm saying is, maybe we should keep people accountable when we absolutely know that things are not true, and pick these people out and let them know that what they're doing is making up BS.
Well, we'll keep a good eye on that over the next few weeks. I know you have a few more in the gun now that you've got on a roll in your media watch regard. I might steer clear of you for a little bit because you're going around whacking media people left, right and centre. I saw you.
As long as I'm not the subject.
I did see another article this week which quoted the truth hurts when you had a whack at Kane. He hasn't, as far as I'm aware, said anything. Kane Corns said anything back yet. I guess we'll stand by for that. But great talking to you again on this bonus episode, and I think it was important to pay tribute to those guys that are retiring.
Yep. No, congratulations to all, and good luck in your future.
See you soon.
You can either take the red pill, you'll wake up, everything was a dream, or you can take the black pill, you can get torched.
Well, I suppose getting torched won't hurt that much. I don't feel anything.
Wait for it.
Oh, wait. I just got a new client. Get torched! Get torched! Get torched!